I've made no secret that I absolutely detested Avowed. It didn't just waste my money, it wasted my time. And quite frankly, at my age, time is the one currency I can't earn back. And Avowed wasted every minute I put into it, even earning my worst game of 2025 moniker. I remember streaming during the launch period where I was literally lulled to sleep 3 times on Twitch. And no, that's not a figure of speech or me being poetic. I physically nodded off mid-stream 3 times. At that moment, I knew it was time to give up. Microsoft effectively stole my money and I just had to live with it. But being the glutton for punishment that I am, I never actually uninstalled Avowed. I kept it there, rotting on my SSD because I had always planned on coming back to it a year later. I had this sliver of hope that my $160 investment might eventually produce an experience that was worthwhile. So here we are in 2026, after dozens upon dozens of gigabytes of patches and an anniversary update that, spoiler alert, isn't worth the bytes used to type the press release. I was curious. I wanted to see if Avowed had improved at all, or if it was just a higher resolution disappointment. But before we crack open the anniversary update, which we'll briefly go into at the end of the video, I think it's pivotal to provide some context. We need to shed some light on why Avowed originally left such a sour taste in my mouth. Development began way back in 2018, with the gaming community getting its first glimpse in 2020. Almost immediately, the advertising machine at Xbox began positioning Avowed as Obsidian's answer to Skyrim. The pitch was intoxicating. Another Fallout New Vegas to Fallout 3 situation. Obsidian, the RPG developer darlings, creating a first-person RPG on their home turf. After all, they'd already made 2 incredible CRPGs in the world of Aora, so the groundwork for the lore was already done and dusted. A release date was set for Q4 2024, but Avowed was pushed back to February 2025 after some less than stellar feedback from early playtesters and content creators. Looking back, I can't even begin to imagine how shonky it must have been to play before the delay, considering the quality of the experience we actually got at launch. But let's be honest, a couple of months delay isn't really going to do very much at all. Obsidian, the developers of Pillars of Eternity, Fallout New Vegas, and The Outer Worlds, delay or not, how could I not be keen? To top all of that off, many of my favorite content creators were singing its praises, so spending a little bit more than I normally would seemed like a no-brainer. Those content creators owe me big time. The only thing Avowed 2025 succeeded at was finding a cure for my insomnia. You wouldn't believe it, but I almost gave up again during my 2026 playthrough. The game crashed a total of 14 times. The worst of it came shortly after I entered the 4th and final zone, Galwain's Tusks, where Avowed decided to crash 7 times in a row. It got so bad I stopped playing for 2 days. But I persevered, and with a grand total of 56.6 hours under my belt, 10 of which were from my first playthrough and 1 hour from the anniversary update, mind you, I can confidently say that Avowed is certainly not as bad as it was. But simply put, it's nowhere near the standards we should expect from a AAA RPG developed by veterans of the industry charging Microsoft prices. This review is going to be structured a little bit differently than my usual content. Firstly, I'm going to dissect what I hated about Avowed in 2025 to set a baseline. Then, we're going to look under the hood of how those systems compare in 2026. Finally, finishing you all off with my impressions of the anniversary update. I won't be spoiling any major story details just in case you do want to play it for yourself, though if you listen to me, you certainly shouldn't, at least not at full price anyway. However, there will be contextual spoilers regarding companions, playable regions, and gear. With that out of the way, let's step back in time and see what Avowed had in store for us in 2025. progression, abysmal. It was just not rewarding to play at all. XP was handed out like it was the most precious resource in the galaxy, and the devs were terrified of running out. Imagine, if you will, engaging in some of the most clunky combat mechanics a AAA game could offer, only to be rewarded with a measly 35 XP. This happened repeatedly, like every encounter. Combat is unavoidable in Avowed. There's no stealth build, and your companions can't be relied upon to take the brunt of the damage, so you're constantly forced to fight, and you're barely rewarded for doing so. Then we get into the items. In Avowed, your gear rarity and the level within that rarity dictate the level of enemies the game believes you're capable of fighting. You've got your standard rainbow color loot, common, uncommon, rare, superb, and exquisite. Each color has 3 upgrade levels. For example, you might face an enemy that's marked purple with 2 skulls. That means you should only engage that opponent with uncommon gear raised to level 2. It's artificial difficulty at its finest. To top all that off, no matter what weapon you have or at what point in the game you acquire it, when you level them up, each weapon of that type will do the exact same amount of damage. Found a greatsword in the starting area? Cool. If you level that up to its maximum, it will have the exact same damage scaling as a late game greatsword. What matters isn't the raw numbers, but the unique modifiers each weapon brings. And with armor, you can only upgrade your chest piece, which is the only armor piece that provides any numerical defenses. Nothing else. Boots, gloves, and trinkets, they just sit there with their random stats. Buildcraft focuses purely on gear attributes, which seems fun, but once you settle on a build, there really isn't a need to be on the lookout for any new gear, especially something with a higher rarity than what you already have equipped, since you can just break it down and upgrade the set you're currently using. Upgrading also takes a huge amount of resources, just an obscene amount. It honestly feels like Avowed wants you to take the combat and progression as seriously as you would in a Souls-like, but the mechanical depth is nowhere near that level. I mean, it's not even in the same fucking suburb. So, leveling is slow and unrewarding, and gear progression is even slower and less rewarding. There are some stark difficulty curves when you enter a new zone, and the balancing was just completely out of whack because you'd always feel underleveled. Even when I approached the endgame, enemies with a combat score far lower than my level capped character with max gear still felt so spongy. Which brings us to combat. It's atrocious.
Not looking so good.
I'm not being hyperbolic or exaggerating when I say that Avowed in 2025 had some of the most poorly optimized combat encounters I've ever played. For context, Avowed allows you to equip 2 weapon sets at once. In 2025, I used a wand and grimoire as my main and a sword and shield as my backup. Oddly enough, to use magic, you have to actually be relatively close to the action. You can't just sit back and fire off spells. Even with 2 companions, every single time a fight would break out, every enemy would just ignore my party members and beeline it straight for me. It made casting spells annoying and healing impossible because the combat framework is built around animation cancelling. You'd think having a melee loadout for my second set would help mitigate any of the issues I had with close quarters combat. No. Taking on 2 or 3, maybe 4 opponents was manageable, but quite often there'd be mobs of 5, 6 or more, with a healthy mix of enemy types. And then we get into the rubber banding. There's nothing I love more than fighting a boss, dodging its attack wind-up and maneuvering out of the way, than watching it slingshot across the arena to hit me anyway, more often than not ignoring my companions who were standing directly in its way. This happened in every single encounter I engaged in, boss or not, without fail. More than half the time, combat was reduced to me dodging attacks, or at least trying to, then trying to heal, just managing to keep myself alive, so maybe, just maybe, I could get in 1 attack. Perhaps that's why Obsidian allows your character to spring back to life when they're killed, because no one bothered to playtest the combat thoroughly enough, so they just introduced resurrection abilities. That ability though is a one and done affair, but not if you fall off a cliff or drown, only if you cop a sword to the face. Such incredibly specific and certainly not immersion breaking necromancy powers we have. Enemy variety is lacking too. There are 4 zones and you'll be finding the same spongy lizard people, bears and bugs no matter where you go. It got really boring, really fast. I really found no enjoyment in the combat loop whatsoever. Dialogue, pointless. The dialogue in Avowed was stilted, stiff and so bland you'd swear you were playing a game written by AI. It's not just the flow of the conversation either, your choices really don't matter. Outside of 3 major events that are highly telegraphed and a couple of minor moments, there is absolutely no nuance. If you're expecting branching narratives based on your decisions or NPCs reacting to you, forget about it. What did you think this was, an RPG? I mean, fuck me, you can go up to any NPC, shoot them in the face, and they don't even blink. And your companions? Some of the worst. In fact, possibly the worst set of companions I've ever played with. Since they're constantly spouting Marvel-like one-liners that never fail to just annoy me while being completely flat, one-dimensional stereotypes. There's the tough one, the heart of gold one, the smart, grounded one, and the eccentric one that likes to say tits a lot.
I'm just titty.
There's also this lag that occurs throughout most cutscenes where something happens and there's a full 2-second pause before my companions react.
Like I could go for some pie.
Shit.
Even just responding to my choices during conversations produces this satellite delay that's just so distracting. And then there's the god in our head. Now, I don't blame the voice actors for any of this. I believe they're doing the best they can with what they have to work with. But whenever Sapodal, our patron god, speaks to us, far out, it's annoying. I found the way they speak to be so grating, constantly talking in metaphors with this flowery, poetic way of speech that just got old so fast.
Did they not glow in the light? Her parents, her sentinels. To grow and flourish still, life, feast, famine, we sense. It dreams in color. Would we use it?
Now, small spoiler alert, our patron god is essentially a child in the cosmic sense anyway. So yeah, they talk in riddles because they really don't know better. But you'd think, and there's my first mistake, thinking that as the game progresses and they listen to our character talk and interact with other NPCs, their speech pattern would change. You know, learning like a child would. The story. Avowed's failure to grasp any semblance of an interesting story was one of the biggest sins of 2025. Taking place in the Pillars of Eternity universe, the same world where Obsidian has already made 2 outstanding RPGs, you'd think they'd be able to craft a story that was a little more developed than what we have. You play as a godlike without knowing your patron god. In Aora, godlikes are people born with physical deformities, supposedly a blessing by their deity. The player character, a citizen of the Adirian Empire and an envoy to the Emperor, comes to the island known as the Living Lands, a place afflicted by a mysterious plague called the Dream Scourge, with our job to find a cure. The locals hate and distrust the Empire because Empire bad, and off you go. I'm sure you can piece the puzzle together from there. It's very bare bones. I mean, it's a really good first draft, sure, but as a final revision, there's really not much to latch onto. The biggest issue the narrative faces is, unfortunately, the world of Aora itself. In Pillars, the world is grey, with even the good and bad choices straddling the line between being completely holy and pure evil, but none of that subtlety is conveyed in Avowed. An incredible juxtaposition considering how dense the world of Aora is, doubly so when you market your game as the next Skyrim. With that said, I suppose one thing we can all agree upon is that Skyrim's narrative doesn't require your undivided attention to understand. Avowed, on the other hand, practically requires you to read pages and pages of lore to figure out what the shit is going on and where you fit into it all. You can even pause the game mid-cutscene to do a little light reading. I love that mechanic in video games, said no one ever. I hated it in Final Fantasy XVI and I hate it here. So let's sum this up a little bit. You have this incredibly lore-rich world and a narrative that is so devoid of any meat, of any real substance. I mean, what the fuck happened? Where is Obsidian getting their shit from? I really need some. Character models, terrible. Some of the worst animated and hideous looking character models I've seen in a game that launched at 100 AUD. I mean, they're seriously bad. Everything is ugly. It looks like they were lifted straight out of Mass Effect with the saturation cranked up. And that's nothing against Mass Effect, a nearly 20-year-old game, but in 2025, when your character models remind the player of a game nearly a quarter of a century old, you've made a mistake. It's not a stylistic choice either. It's purely and simply bad. All the usual suspects are here: dead eyes, lips that move slightly too much, jaws that open far too wide, the whole uncanny valley experience for your viewing pleasure. RPG mechanics, or lack thereof. It's very, very important to keep in mind that throughout this video of me being hypercritical to Avowed, that the game was marketed as a Skyrim competitor, Obsidian's second innings against Bethesda. So when you jump into a game with that aura built around it and find there's no such thing as stealing, no crime system whatsoever, and no real stealth, it's jarring. I mean, sure, you can hide in the grass and use your special ability to stealth kill an enemy, but the enemy placement and pathing works against the long grass placement. So killing one enemy just results in alerting the entire mob. There's buildcraft, sure, the semblance of a buildcraft anyway, with some abilities certainly making a difference, but it's a slave to the already flawed combat system. And the narrative is fixed with only one of 4 endings to choose from in the final dialogue option. Wow, speaking of Mass Effect, here's Mass Effect 3 all over again. Finally, we come to the absolute 2 positives I can praise that carry over from 2025 to 2026. The landscapes. There were genuinely many moments when I would just stop and look and take in how gorgeous this game can truly be at times. Even though the town around you is just okay, the mountain range over yonder or the exploding volcano beckons you to explore, even though I knew I couldn't. But just stopping and pausing and browsing and looking, it gave me this impression that I could. It sucked me into Avowed. It added that je ne sais quoi. It has that atmospheric weight, something that Obsidian has mastered. And secondly, the sound design and score, from the crack of a gunshot to the haunting creaks and moans of a deserted desert, it makes for some genuinely beautiful moments. It gave Avowed those few brief, singular points that showed there is a worthy title buried underneath all this mess. Whew. Okay, let's take a breath. Inhale, exhale. That was the shortest long way for me to go over why I disliked Avowed so much and why I stopped playing other than just putting me to sleep. Why would I play it again? Truth be told, part curiosity and part wanting to get my money's worth. So now that I've finished Avowed, the 2026 version, let's see how it compares. Just so I don't waste your time, let's first talk about those things that, unless the game was stripped back to its very foundations, couldn't be addressed in 12 months. The story and by degree the dialogue, without completely reworking so many minute details that are hardwired into the very skeleton of Avowed, it's impossible to adjust either of these. The companions too, I just wouldn't expect them to sound any different. Drafting a new script, recording new lines, animating new scenes, that's a massive monetary investment that only a studio like Larian is willing to do. I mean, we're lucky Microsoft even allowed an anniversary update and didn't just shutter Obsidian entirely. The character models can be included in the previous category of simply requiring too many resources to bring up to an acceptable standard. Although it did appear that the stiffness and janky movement was smoothed out just a little bit. There's still no real RPG mechanics at all, no crime system. I mean, Avowed doesn't want you to steal or enjoy anything that might take it up a notch. But there is the third person mode now, which the game recommends you do not use during combat. So that just leaves us with the combat, the progression, and the new content. Not a lot to work with, but here goes. Progression. It's slightly better. Let's be clear, I'm not talking about gear progression. That hasn't improved at all. I'm talking about XP rewards. It's certainly not as bad as it was during the launch window, that's for damn sure, but it's not satisfying. I was still being rewarded for my efforts with double-digit XP, but I'd also be generously granted XP in the hundreds or thousands now, which was nice. I really can't stress how much of an issue progression is when the combat experience is balanced by gear levels, because it just doesn't feel like it matters when enemies still absorb bullshit's amount of damage. But at least in 2026 it feels better. Certainly not at the standard it should be, but it's night and day compared to what it was. I really do want to circle back to the gear scaling though, and how it removes another layer of potential enjoyment from the player. There's no risk versus reward. Do I choose the weapon with the lower attack score but better bonuses, or the crazy damage dealing one with worse attributes? Avowed removes that decision from the player. Damage is irrelevant, just focus on stats. Sure, on paper that might sound fun, but there's something special about holding on to a weapon you got early on just because it fits your build, or if it had a modifier that made everything just a little bit more fun. Combat. Good, but combat is light years ahead of where it was. But, and it's a big but, my enjoyment comes not from any tweaks made to enemy rubber banding, mob dog piles, or the usefulness of my companions, but rather my build. In 2026, I decided to play as a gunslinger, dual pistols in one loadout and a rifle in the other. It meant now I could reduce enemy numbers by 1 or even 2 by taking out opponents from long range and mitigate the rubber banding by shooting an enemy as they hurtle towards me. Although that didn't help against these stealth lizards that go invisible and charge towards you, even though you can still see their outline. No, says Obsidian, they're now invulnerable until they've landed an attack. I doubled down on my build by focusing on crit chance and crit damage, with some abilities that increase my stun and companion stun damage. Don't get me wrong, it's not fun, certainly not fun in the traditional sense. Enemies still interrupt your healing animation, they'll still teleport to your location from the other side of the map, ignore your companions and focus exclusively on you, but for the most part I could tolerate the vast majority of encounters. On the odd occasion too, the stars would align and I'd manage to actually enjoy myself, but those moments were fleeting. Combat became another tick on the long line of checklists that make up the overall chore-like nature of Avowed. So yeah, that's about it for the improvements in 2026. But what about the anniversary update? The delay in this video actually gave me the extra time to experience the anniversary update, which, as predicted, did very, very little, save one big thing. The fun factor. Avowed is finally fun. But that was down to one thing, New Game Plus. All my abilities and gear carried over into my New Game Plus run. Strange that my attributes didn't though, which led to a brief moment of confusion where I thought I did something wrong when starting a New Game Plus run because I started at level 1 but with all my abilities, even though the level cap was raised. It was a little bit odd, but I figured it out eventually. I just found it a little bit weird that you would start with a full complement of abilities, but at the very beginning in terms of level progression. Even more so when enemies now have new buffs and resistances, so yeah, a little weird how they balance this New Game Plus mode, but anyway. The point being is, as soon as I had enough coin, 2,500 to be exact, I was able to respec my abilities into a melee build, focusing on crit damage and bleed. I found that I was able to not quite one-shot smaller enemies, while bosses still provided the right amount of damage absorption without turning into spongy messes. Combat was fluid and responsive. Not exactly a power fantasy, but neither was it a slog you had to get through. Now I actually kind of wanted to. The character creator gets a minor tweak too, allowing you to choose your godlike's race, even with racial stat bonuses, complete with godlike deformities that actually look cool. Amazing, such an incredibly progressive mechanic. The 1-year anniversary update should have been the Avowed we got on day 1.
On second thought, what? Andre's titty.
Going back over my notes, my time with Avowed in 2026 can best be displayed with the current stock price of Ubisoft. In the beginning I was having fun, actually having a lot of fun. At least my notes tell me that, I sure as shit don't remember. But those highs slowly taper out before completely falling off a cliff. It's an RPG in concept and advertisement only. A bare bones attempt at capitalizing on Obsidian's good name, former good name, the Pillars of Eternity world, and perhaps most sinister of all, the Skyrim nostalgia and Elder Scrolls 6 anticipation. Sure, my experience is better than what it was in 2025. I mean, I finished the game and didn't fall asleep once, but I had to force myself to continue, sometimes going days without playing, with stability still being a major factor. And that's just not what I want from Obsidian. Quite frankly, their whole thing of releasing a game every 12 to 24 months is worrisome. This fast-tracked release cycle shows both Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 have failed to meet sales expectations. Gamers know when developers are producing games on a treadmill. Games need time to mature, it's that simple. Half-assing an RPG, even an action RPG, will inevitably lead to a shallow experience. For one final nail in the coffin, just have a look at this world map. It's vast, it gives the impression that you can get lost in it. But no, there's just 4 areas you can explore. The rest of the map is unused real estate, and in those areas that we do find ourselves, there is never any new enemies. If you clear the zone, as you naturally do as you explore, it becomes a barren wasteland devoid of life, making further exploration and backtracking depressing. This map summarizes Avowed better than any of my waxing words ever could. I have never been happier to uninstall a game as much as I have been when I uninstalled Avowed. It's been removed from my hard drive and I never have to think about it again until I see it in my Steam library as a constant reminder of the game that could have been. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. It really means a lot to me that you watch these videos, whether you've watched 10 seconds or the whole thing. I'm eternally grateful for. This is something I really do want to do more often. It just seems that every time I get on a roll, something happens. But either way, no matter where you are in the world, have a great day and we'll see you in the next time. See ya.